So hello and welcome to the second webinar in the Elemental Talks program for 2022. Happy New Year. I think we can still say that. It's January. Our topic today, reducing cost while increasing comfort, the business case for smart buildings, and our session sponsored by ACO. Your chair for the next 60 minutes. My name's Jim McClelland, founder and editor of SustMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on the panel this sunny morning are Claire Callan, Smart Places Consultant, WSP, Dr. Joe Patterson, Senior Research Fellow, Welsh School of Architecture, Cardiff University, and Tina Mistry, Relationships Manager at ACO. Hello to you all. It is all live with Q&A to finish, so pop your questions in the Ask a Question box you should see in the middle, probably, bottom of your screen. The clue's in the name. You type them in there, you pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. So, this webinar forms part of a program of talks hosted and produced by elementalexpo.com. For those of you not familiar with it, it's the online community for professionals focused on innovation, heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You'll find a full diary of events on the website, range of upcoming webinars. You can also view the back catalogue, whole host of topics. It's all available on demand. Who's who of great speakers, and I should add, everything is free to access and share. Plus, this year, the physical, real-world, in-person Elemental Expo will be taking place at the NEC in Birmingham, 21 to 23 June 2022. So get that in your diary. See you there. Right, very brief intro from me because we've got a lot of ground to cover. Smart technologies and buildings. The use of smart technologies in the built environment is here to stay, in a nutshell. But, and there is a but, while smart buildings have been a topic on the agenda and increasingly a solution on site in the commercial world for some time now, the same cannot be said for residential markets. So what does demand and deployment look like on the home front, especially in the social housing sector? How are solutions such as smart thermostats, lights, electricity outlets, sensors for damp, humidity, mold, indoor air, plus voice command technologies helping us to look after our most vulnerable occupants, for example? Over the next hour, we'll explore innovations, trends, but also roadblocks associated with designing, building and maintaining these smart residential properties and accommodation. Questions to consider might include: how can implementing more intelligent building solutions both cut costs for landlords and increase comfort and safety for residents? Also, how could going smart affect the user experience and potentially even help democratize communities? Plus, what impact will it have on our journey to reducing our carbon footprint? This is the latest in an ongoing series of webinars produced by Elemental in association with ACO and follows on from a fascinating session broadcast just last month on the importance of indoor air quality in today's built environment. It's entitled Breathe Right, and you can check it out on demand. So, right, enough from me. Let the debate begin. So as we start to explore the opportunities offered in residential markets by smart technologies and buildings in terms of both cost and comfort, plus some of the challenges, I'd like to start by asking our panelists, of course, to introduce themselves, but also to explain their perspective, share some opening insights. So it's briefly kind of, who are you? Where do you fit into the puzzle? Where do you think we are right now in terms of a smart revolution emerging in the residential market? So first up, perspective on where the tech meets the people in cities and places. Claire, your opening thoughts, please.
Hi, good morning, Jim. Thank you very much for having me this morning. So my name is Claire Callan. I work at an engineering firm called WSP. We have a huge focus right now on building performance, on net zero. My background, I started many years ago in financial services doing leadership and learning. I then moved into strategy and innovation, and then I decided I wanted a complete change of scene and I wanted to get into the cities domain, took an MSc, and I'm now working on the smart buildings and smart places team at WSP. So what we tend to find, we have sort of, clients that are in sort of the more student and social end of the market. So they're looking for efficiencies. They want to optimize their buildings. They want to detect, leaks or issues before they become expensive and hard to fix. So those, at one end of the spectrum, we have people who are very much just focused on practicality. At the other end of the spectrum, we have some very high-end residential. In that case, the world is your oyster. You can connect many, many things and have incredibly interesting use cases and very smart homes. Personally, I'm very focused on the human behavior side of the equation. So I like to think a lot about, we spend a lot of time on our team with our clients saying, okay, you say you want this, but what will you do with it? And will you really use it? And does it work for the things you do every day? So we tend to find with a lot of our commercial clients, they want to look at ways to make buildings more efficient, make offices more productive, just make everyone's everyday lives a lot easier. And, one point I'll pick up on that, I think in the intro, you mentioned supporting vulnerable citizens. And I think one point I'm very interested in is, how we can do more to help the elderly with smart homes. But I'm also, facing this with my own family. My father's 70, my godmother's 84. And they haven't grown up with digital the same way we have. So it's quite a challenge. We set my dad up with smart everything. We come back a year later and we discover just one by one, they've all kind of clicked off and he's not really that bothered to get them back on again. So I do think it's quite interesting when we think about, my neighbor is 85. He doesn't do anything online. I think there are generations of people who are still going to be in the market for quite a long time. And we need to be careful about that digital divide. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. So very good and welcome today, of course. But so some clients ranging from those sort of seeking efficiencies and practicalities, maybe in the student social end of things, to, as you mentioned, the high-end resi market where the world is your oyster. Nice point about obviously human behavior. Of course, we're talking about buildings and things and stuff and tech for people. It's all for people to live in and use and hopefully to benefit from. As you say, also, we must be mindful of the digital divide or exclusion or discrimination or inequality that is prevalent. And I agree wholeheartedly. Personal experience, I was unofficially IT support for my mother-in-law for quite a long time with my very limited knowledge, and had to Google an awful lot of solutions in order to tell what to do. So yeah, I feel your pain in that regard. So thank you very much. So Joe, coming to you now. As a knowledge leader pioneering research around smart local energy systems, your perspective, please, Joe.
Hi. So I'm a senior research fellow at the Welsh School of Architecture at Cardiff University, and I've been carrying out research into energy use and sustainability in the built environment for the last 25 years. And most of this research has involved housing and engaging with the stakeholders that are directly involved with the housing. So obviously occupants, local authorities, the owners of the properties, to make sure that whatever solutions we're providing and suggesting actually meet their requirements, right through from planning, design, construction, procurement is also very important, maintenance as well. So it's making sure that any of systems that are installed in housing meet or reduce costs as much as possible. Things like maintenance really cost a lot of money. If you've got to send someone out, they don't understand what they need to be doing. They don't even know what they're looking at when they get there. So that engagement with stakeholders has been critical. Through all that research over the last 12 years, we've been involved in, we've been moving from the old-fashioned bolt-on approach with renewables to bring in a whole energy systems approach to particularly to housing with new builds and retrofits. And we've been again working with social housing providers to design whole energy systems that are affordable and replicable to typical housing. And then we've designed these with them, we've planned them, we've installed them, and so enabled them to learn from the experience to see what fits together, how the technologies work together. So things like a PV system integrated into the roof, so you don't need to pay for tiles, how that works with the battery storage, and then also fabric improvements such as external wall insulation, internal wall insulation, LED lighting, those kinds of things. So the occupants and the social landlords have been highly involved in all of those projects. And I'm also involved in a UK-wide Energy Rev consortium, which is looking at scaling up individual technologies to larger scale, which is looking at smart local energy systems. So it's kind of an approach, but obviously the smart element is critical to make all of these scale up on a scale that's necessary to achieve anywhere near the zero carbon targets that we've got.
Excellent, very nice. Opening thoughts there. Thank you, Joe. So stakeholder engagement to ensure systems and solutions actually meet real world requirements. Nice point about the cost of maintenance. Of course, there are more remote solutions and diagnosis and fixes potentially. Going Got about whole energy systems, affordability, applicability, and up to a point, replicability, because that whole kind of learning culture, we are all learning daily, in this new environment. And a nice point finally about smart being critical to scale. And we already have a question actually relating to that kind of discussion from Luke in the chat there. So we're getting the questions already. Fire them in the ask a question box at the bottom. And now in the round of opening comments, Tina, if I come to you, so developing strategic partnerships to facilitate change within social housing. Your thoughts, please, Tina.
I think that's crucial. So I'm Tina Mishra, Relationships Manager at ACO. We've been going for over 30 years, working with over 92% of social housing right across the UK. Gives a unique perspective. And particularly the role that I do is covering over 4 different nations. So it's almost a bird's eye view of how each nation is operating at the moment, from Scotland to Northern Ireland to Wales to England, slightly different in their delivery, slightly different in their thoughts. But partnerships are critical to make anything work. I think it's about my background specifically around working in public and local authority background and resident engagement and the built environment. It's how those individual facets work together. So strategic relationships are really important, and it's about having a holistic approach to delivery. So on one hand, we talk about the whole notion of fuel poverty in one aspect. The other aspect, we talk about net zero decarbonisation, technology in the other, housing quality in the other part, and resident engagement. Everything needs to be looked at on a holistic approach. We can't have one requirement for one specific social housing agenda. It needs to be looked at holistically. And it also needs to be holistically in terms of approach and delivery for budget allocation, procurement, as has already been mentioned, but also remembering there are different stakeholders within social housing that need to work collaboratively together. What we're doing with technology and the data that's produced out of it, we work with HomeLink, we've acquired HomeLink, and it produces so many more data points than we've ever had before. Data is brilliant if it's utilised correctly. And it's that data culture that needs to be in place. So there's the holistic approach to delivery, joint collaborative working within the social housing sector, internally in the organisation, but also externally as well. And working with public, private and third sector charity organisations. But that culture of data is quite critical. Data doesn't sit in IT anymore. Yep. Data sits right across the board. And it's also remembering everything we do is great to have regulations and standards and policies. Brilliant. Black and white on paper is great. And exactly what Claire said, it's remembering the human impact on what we're trying to achieve. And it's about safety and well-being and someone's health within a home. We're dealing with people within their homes, their families, and most importantly, developing thriving communities equally as well. And it's about that joint up approach again.
Excellent. Thank you. And a round of applause from somebody's pet dog in the background there. So obviously, you're winning an audience instantly there too. So yeah, bird's eye view, nation to nation. Now, smart crosses boundaries, but in some cases, as we know, policy does not. And there's no one size fits all, but there is a holistic approach to delivery. Nice point about budget allocation and procurement. Some of those tougher words that we need to get into the debate straight away. And data is brilliant, no longer sits just with IT, but of course, it's what we do with it that makes the difference beyond merely collecting. So great opening thoughts there. So now this middle section is what I call challenges and conflicts. So you can guess this is the fun stuff. We're going to zoom in on specifics. Now I'd like to challenge our panelists to why it's still early days for the rollout of smart solutions in residential markets. Kind of what's the problem? Innovation, scale, cost, culture, demand, market forces. What needs to happen for these solutions to start mainstreaming up and down the country, right across the housing portfolio? So in this difficult middle section, I'll come to you first, Joe. So when it comes to energy, carbon, the climate agenda, the talk, not least in the media, typically revolves around generation and electrification, rather than perhaps usage and efficiency. So how can smart tech and buildings, especially in the housing sector, hope to make their voice heard and influence the wider debate more so as to drive that demand and attract investment? So how can they get heard in that big narrative there, Joe?
I think at the moment, smart is still seen as a luxury and a gadget. It's not seen as something that integrated in. Although we do have smart technologies in our homes. We all have smart technologies in our homes. We're just not maybe necessarily recognize that they are smart, but they are seen as a gadget, and not affordable to a lot of the population. I think we really do forget that. But there's a huge opportunity for them to benefit everybody, when they are designed and installed and connected to each other properly. At the moment, we find that the occupants have struggled to engage with anything that's new and novel technologies. They're kind of not interested. People's lives are busy. They got additional things to think about, to worry about. They don't need the added complication of like Claire said earlier on, my parents don't know how to make this work again. If it doesn't work, they don't know the units that the smart technology is talking to them in. It's all very complicated. They just don't have the time to think about that as well. So the retrofit work that we've done and the new build work that we've done is we've always tried to minimize the smart element of it, to impact with the resident, to provide residents with the most simplest of information that can, is it working or not? Am I generating energy at the moment or not? It's a matter of a green light. They don't need numbers. They just need a green light or a red light to say, yes, your battery's full, use it now. That's the kind of level of smart that 99% of the population really needs. But I think obviously we all want comfortable lives. We all want to reduce carbon emissions, and so I think it's down to the technology or solution providers to make those solutions as smart as possible. But we have to also remember that the home is an interdependent system. So it's not only about the PV panels or the batteries working together, because obviously they will work together because they're both electric, they're both generate, that's already been done. But you've also got the fabric. And if you had a PV panel and a battery designed to fit in a 1970s house, those PV and batteries might well be oversized because the designer isn't aware that the 1970s house has had external wall insulation, has got two residents that are out all day. So you need to know more about the fabric. You need to know more about the people and how they live to be able to design that and make that system be really smart, not just smart to what it's doing itself. So it's making that whole interdependent system work together. And there doesn't seem to be a skill set in the sector that can bring all of that together at the moment to enable that level of communication and collaboration to happen. The skill sets in I'd like to call it the construction sector, not the green skills sector, but the construction sector, to bring those solutions together right across the whole house as a system.
Excellent. So I'm really getting into some of the challenges. Perfect. So we always used to say at SustMeme that sustainability, it is big and it is clever, and that's a good thing. But when that just becomes complexity and bewildering, and you get a sort of paralysis by analysis or something, in fact, it slows progress. And as you say, smart is still perhaps perceived as luxury or gadget thing rather than affordable. So there's some myth busting and some misperception fixing yet to be done potentially, and it needs to be understood to be easy. We need a certain clarity, and there is an interdependency about it. So what we're looking really is for a people smart approach, not just a tech smart approach. But a nice point at the end there, we're all hearing about green jobs. I've written about it, everybody's read about it, green jobs. In many cases, we are way behind putting together the kind of personnel, human resource we need within the industry like construction to start this kind of scaling we're talking about. If you do the maths, the numbers don't actually add up on, for instance, heat pumps. Try doing the maths, it doesn't work. So there we are, we're really getting into it now. Tina, middle tricky section for you. So ACO is a European market leader in home life safety, but there are obviously regulatory frameworks in place around the likes of fire in housing, for instance. So how can we expect to see significant market growth across a whole suite of smart home solutions without those key mandatory drivers making it happen?
So there are some mandatory requirements there. So if we look at fitness for human habitation, social and private landlords, Wales has just introduced theirs and will be implemented from July and onwards. We have Fitness for Human Habitation in England. Scotland is ahead in terms of their delivery around EASH2 and looking at how everything's going to be delivered in terms of the net zero decarbonisation conversation. So there are some, but they're not a legal requirement. I think it comes back to exactly what Joe said. It's that human impact aspect. I think we manufacture everything based on understanding the end user's needs. So you can't have, for example, we have an app, but the app is developed based on educating and empowering residents and the end resident. And it's making sure we put that people focus at the forefront of our minds. And that's exactly what we do. Because I think if we can get into the hearts and minds of people, it's about educating people and saying, well, we have to do this, not because you have to do it, it's because you want to do something to change, to save the planet. And actually knowing about your indoor air quality will help your health. So it's about creating a need, but also explaining why it needs to be done, and then explaining how the technology needs to be implemented in their homes and how it's going to help and support their health and well-being. So we're doing things, for example, creating residence forums, and we're asking residents from homeowners, social rental, private rental, what does safety and well-being mean to you? Because if we don't understand that, how are we as a sector going to work collaboratively together to create something that's going to be meaningful for anyone out there? And I think if we get that right, do we necessarily need regulation standards and policies to help? If we as a society can get behind why we're doing what we're doing and understanding the need behind it and the difference it's going to make to you, your family and your community, then those are in need. And I think that's the main aspect of it as well. I think it's not standardization. There needs to be a standardization across all nations, because you've got large organizations doing great work and messaging out. But there needs to be a standard approach to nation, because at the end of the day, regardless of where you live, we're only human beings trying to do better in our lives and improve our health and well-being of the society, really.
Excellent, some good points there. And fitness for human habitation, but not a legal requirement, as you pointed out, bringing in ideas around hearts and minds and what really is an education and a communication piece effectively. And the health and well-being agenda, obviously, a lot of people understand that diets are part of that beauty products, exercise, but somehow their house isn't, their home isn't. How can that not be part of the health and well-being agenda? But for many people, that's way down the list. Nice point about indoor air quality, which of course COVID has foregrounded for the wrong reasons and the right reasons simultaneously. It's made people focus on air quality and ventilation in a way they didn't. But also you're finishing there with a call for standardization. And I would say as a longer in the tooth sustainability person, it's a sure sign of a maturing market that there's a lot of technology and players and names and entrants come in. And then once it gets big enough and you start talking about mainstreaming and scale, the first word that starts coming up is standardization. People want a level playing field and they want standards and they want to be able to roll it out across whether it's regions or countries or types of property. So nice call for standardization there.
Can I just mention one point? The other aspect is in terms of that development, it also needs to be standardization of accessing data.
Yep.
And a standardized platform, because we can't go into a home, have different technology that looks at the whole notion of how battery storage is working to your indoor air quality, mold and damp humidity. There needs to be a single portal and one app. There doesn't need to be multiple apps and applications.
Well, you're already half answering a question that Luke had put in the chat, actually. And I see Claire's got her hand up now, and we're getting it. Claire, do you would like to add a little extra?
I would. I mean, one thing I'd love to pick up on the data question is I feel like it's very similar to where financial services, or sorry, the industry as a whole is very similar to where financial services was 5 years ago. So, starting to experiment with data, starting to realize that, okay, if I want these two different gadgets to talk to each other, actually, like they both have different ways of setting up their data in the background. So we're starting to have integration standards, like things like bricks and haystacks that are out there that, again, coming back to Luke's great question there at the top, but a lot of them are still quite immature. So there's great work happening, and that is the beginning of that journey, and that needs to progress, because I think that question of interconnectivity is huge. When you have developers that want that portfolio-wide view, right? You want to see your whole estate. You don't want to see it building by building. You don't want them having different data in the background. So I think, that's I'm seeing a positive move, but it's also linked to that question about skills, because at the moment we're trying to hire and we're so challenged. And I would love, if anyone on the call is interested, I would love to talk to you. But, you know, again, it's finding people who have both the construction knowledge and the engineering knowledge, and then also the tech knowledge, which, you know, universities are now starting to bring in, and some of the more recent grads are starting to have that combined view, but it's still a big gap. It's all interconnected, right? Holistic, as you said, Tina.
Yeah, good point. And the construction industry, as I keep saying, is now competing for those hires with tech companies, software developers, you know, financial services, all sorts of industries. It's not just competing with other allied trades. So it's, you know, we really need to get the messaging and the advertising and everything that goes with it right to kind of attract this new generation of a more diverse and differently skilled workforce. So now, if Claire, I've come back to you then. So kind of following nicely on around this, my challenging question to you is, so sometimes, I think we've touched on this already, it can seem a leap just to move even from specifying a single piece of intelligent tech to talking in terms of an integrated smart building solution. Never mind places, even citywide scenarios. I'm zooming out and out, it's getting bigger and bigger. So how can smart thinking actually help us join those dots, Claire?
So I think a lot of what we're seeing, it very much comes back again to that outcomes focus of sitting with someone who, whether they have a new, you know, housing development or they're building a large commercial building, to say, what are your ambitions here? And I think going back to Joe's point earlier about smart is often viewed as expensive and shiny and gadgets. And actually a lot of what we're doing, you know, at least half of what we do across our portfolio is optimization. Is, do you have the right sensors across your building to understand what's really happening? You know, do you have occupancy sensors so you can know, for some reason, nobody ever uses that conference room, and then you go in and discover there's no furniture. I don't know what the answers are, but when you start to have that data, you can have that look. But also then, you know, at the start, again, it's the outcomes focus. It's saying, if you put this system in, what would you do with that information? How would you make it work? How would it help you? So we're very focused on engagement early in the process to say, you know, a phrase I use a lot with my clients is, you can have anything, but you probably don't want to pay for everything. So you really start at that big picture and start saying, well, if you had this and you could connect it to that, you could build the following use case and get this great opportunity or outcome. So that's what a lot of our conversations are. You know, I'm a big fan of the right information at the right time. To Tina's point about how you engage with residents, there's a great story out of Norway recently about a supermarket that started putting the carbon footprint on receipts. So you could see that, you know, beef, quite energy intensive. I eat blueberries that typically flown in from Chile. That's quite bad. Versus, you know, where is food more local, or, you know, vegetables are typically less intensive than meat. And what they've seen over the course of the year is that consumption of those heavier and more intensive items has dropped. And it's, you know, I would look at that if it was on my receipt, but I wouldn't be sitting there looking it up. I'm not that committed to it. So right information at the right time, I think, is brilliant. And, you know, the final big perspective that we see is, you know, net zero is pushing everyone to understand and optimize their building. So on the financial side, developers are being pushed by the Task Force for Climate Disclosures, I believe it's called, that if you're building a new building, you have to show how it is meeting, you know, how it's not adding to the problem. And so as a result, people are now getting very focused on understanding the energy performance across their building. And so a lot of what we do is about, you know, is the ventilation working correctly? Is the cooling happening as it should? Is the heating happening as it should? But then also looking, you know, where can we learn from things like Passive House or other, you know, design guidelines, so that we can build buildings that don't need technology to make these things happen. So that's kind of the big perspective. And the one final thing I'd love to add, is on that point of, you know, legislation pushing people to understand. In Australia, they have a rating system called Neighbours. So similar to if you've ever bought a fridge here and you have that little A to F guide that says whether your fridge is energy efficient, something very similar for buildings. But where it really took off, it was kind of a niche legislation thing, was when they brought in legislation that said you have to have your neighbours rating, so the building efficiency rating, in the same font size as, I think it was either the words for sale or it was the actual price of the building. So suddenly, rather than being a little asterisk in the corner, your neighbours rating was, you know, fairly substantial part of your advertisement sign. And that completely changed the motivation. Developers suddenly were very interested in making sure they had strong and good neighbours ratings, because they were going to be very visible. So again, opportunities.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Claire. So good. Systemic viewpoint, optimization, outcomes focus, and of course we are living in an increasingly sensor-rich environment. I think the 1 trillion sensors mark used to be saying it'd be here by 2030, then they brought it forward to 2025. It's probably here already. A baffling number of sensors surround us in our daily lives, but not tech for tech's sake, as you suggested, not over-speccing just because we can. It's a question of what is useful and appropriate. And also, nice point about with the analogy with putting it on your restaurant bill or it's point of sale, point of use information, having the right info when you need it, not a manual. You know, we always we know what happens, say, with computer manuals, that they go on the cupboard potentially and don't come out until 2 years later when something goes wrong. So you need quicker access to the information as and when you need it in the right format. So, and net zero as a driver. Nice point about that. So having looked at a lot of the challenges, and as I sort of say, we've lifted up the stones and we've looked at some of the more nasty things underneath. Now this final section before we go to audience Q&A, and do pop your questions in the ask a question at the bottom, or I think Tina's already got her hand up.
I just wanted to touch on a point about skill set requirement. I think that's such an important aspect. Everyone, if we look at past 2030, we're first having a retrofit coordinator. But there's so many new roles coming out. The roles are great. The skill set needs to be there. I think you're right, Claire, in terms of that new build development perspective. There's things for REBA collaborative working with REBA required even more in terms of creating those more user-friendly homes. Passive housing is great, but what does that mean to end user? I think developing those skill set and new build are going to be vital, because that's the area that we can put right now. But the flip side of it is, if we look at the retrofit requirements, it's about upskilling existing workforces, your electricians that have diversified what they're doing into installing renewable technologies. That needs to be looked at, but also upcoming requirements. We're working with Scottish Government at the moment to looking at a skill set requirement for higher education. How do we build university courses, colleges and school national curriculum at the moment to create that psychology around having user-friendly, having technology, a more insulated home as part of second nature? But that education piece is really vital, and bringing that together.
You're very, very right about the skill set requirements, and also I'm very keen for us to talk about, not necessarily today, but generally about time, because we keep leaving that out of the equation. You know, we have things we could achieve, but it's when. You know, so as you say, there are skills we need right now. There are people we need on board right now, but there are also skills we need to develop and grow and nurture, and transferable skills and upskilling for next year, the year after, 5 years, etc. And having those multiple timeframes in play at once is difficult. And notoriously, business works very short term. Some other programs work very slow and long term, and often there's a lack of sync between the two, and potentially things get lost in the mix. But now we're soon getting into the questions. So my last round, it's going to be a quicker round. We're going to look at reasons to be cheerful. So this is a fun bit. So if we look at how successful, sustainable approaches to adopting some of these smart solutions, they can save money for owners and managers, boost benefits for residents, drive market demand, and help us meet those net zero targets. So first, Tina, I'm coming to you. So for successfully implementing these more intelligent building solutions, put on your rose-tinted spectacles. So how can the costs go down for the landlords while the comfort and safety simultaneously go up for residents? Paint us a happy picture, Tina.
Technology isn't scary, and neither is the future. I think it's about working together and having that future vision and working it back. Let's fast forward 20 years and 25 years and beyond, even 15. We're going to be having houses that talk to us, not us talk to them. And that culture needs to change now. So if you look at social housing again, that culture is within that culture of data, culture of technology, and taking risk. It's not risky. And that starts from the top. And ultimately, everyone in social housing, all they want to do is to make sure residents are kept safe and the health and well-being is as great as it can be. So let's talk about technology isn't risk. Let's do it now to meet the future. And bear in mind, we're only doing this to keep people safe and increase the well-being in the homes. It's about people. I think and then everything will fall into place, and budgets, requirements thereafter.
Perfect. That's a very positive view. So we're de-risking that change through tech. And I must say, if my house could talk to me right now, it might be mentioning the M word, maintenance, but I'll probably be getting it in the ear, I think. So, but so Claire, if I come to you in this road to intersection. So, context of cities, how might smart buildings potentially have a democratizing influence on communities and change places for good, crucially for all? How could that be happening?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing that I'm quite impressed at when you look over the longer scale, you know, if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, we would have been talking about private residential and very high-end specifications of smart stuff. But what's really excited me is a lot of these features that were once for the super rich only, they're increasingly coming into the reach of at least the middle class. You know, you look at something like the Ring doorbell, everyone can have a doorman. You know, a window blind, you know, £200 for a window blind that will go up and down, and either you've got a remote control or you've got it linked to a voice speaker. It's still expensive to do an entire house, but it could be a really worthwhile investment for someone with disabilities. So I think the fact that this stuff has become a lot more common and has become a lot more user friendly over the years, even if it's still not perfect. Yep. I think that's a huge thing for me. And I also look, when you start looking across the community and thinking about things like lighting in the public realm, you know, you have, again, the holistic word again, challenges like, you know, if we overlight our public environments, you know, that's a negative. We don't want our city centers lit up like Christmas trees in the middle of the night, wasting energy. But if you can do clever things with sensors and making sure that, you know, the public realm remains safe without being, as I said, lit up like a Christmas tree, I think there's a lot you can do in there to start understanding and providing just places that work much better for people. You know, and I think for me, the most important thing, I think the technologies that do best are very often the technologies that bring people together. So ironically, you know, I think we can build these great and amazing, super technical places, but we still need to focus on the human interactions and how those are enabled by the technology, rather than trying to build a house that can, you know, nurse its occupant without the occupant ever actually seeing another human. So keeping a focus on people and how to bring them together.
Excellent. So some good points there. And yet nice about the idea of, we're talking about mainstreaming and scale, and of course, potentially affordability can therefore go up as costs go down once things become mass market potentially. And more user friendly. And I like the idea you're suggesting perhaps we can be brought together through tech, you know, in a real people centered kind of way. So in this reasons to be cheerful bit then, Joe, I'm coming to you last now. So fast forward maybe 5 or 10 years, get your crystal ball out. 5-10 years in advance, how can smart buildings and smart solutions shrink that carbon footprint of UK housing? How's that going to happen 5-10 years time?
I think the potential is huge for homes to be exceptionally smart, and a lot of it is down to having data that goes across the board. So, you know, we need data. We need the data about the fabric of our homes. We need to understand how they perform so that we can then diagnose and install the right technologies to match that fabric, and also the occupants that are living in there as well. And we've already got technologies that can allow us to do all of that. It's just bringing them all together, use it with a flexible hub that can enable that, and then enables data to be shared across that hub. And looking at some of the research that we've done in Energy Rev is almost like a system of systems with different layers. Okay, yeah. And for example, you know, if you know how your fabric works, how your systems work, how the occupants live in those homes, and that interacts with the energy market, your home can then export and import energy into the energy grid and act as a storage system for the whole grid. So, you know, you can be part of a whole the smart local energy system rather than being an independent part of the system. But all of that needs the right data to be collected, shared, and interpreted. Obviously, there are risks with that, and, you know, risks of cyber physical attacks to the data, and that all needs to be protected. Ethics need to be protected. Everything needs to be protected. But that sharing and use of data to enable that sharing to happen with the right data and with the right objectives behind it as well. I think that obviously people need to make money, but I think, you know, we need to make sure that these inequalities don't happen as well, because we don't want to see the gap between the rich and poor get even bigger, you know, and it is happening, and we've got to prevent that from happening.
Excellent. So good points there. Data as enabler. Of course, you did give a name check to issues such as cyber risk and ethics that go with that. Of course, there are responsibilities and provisions necessary there too, but it could give a more equitable opportunity potentially, and there's a lot to be realized in that sense. So now we're excellent so far from the panel, and now we're really getting into the fun bit because we're getting into the audience questions. So we're going to open it up to the floor. It's a live Q&A, so keep them coming. You'll see there's an ask a question bit at the minute. Tina's already got her hand up.
I think I just want to lead on to exactly what Joe said. That ethics, GDPR and data security is so crucial. I think quite a lot of people feel nervous about their data being shared, and that needs to be considered. We've worked with Bristol University to create a piece of study. It's a white paper on the ethical approach to IoT, which I'll put in the chat box when I found it. And we've worked with Trowers to create a GDPR note, a note for GDPR requirements for anyone that's looking at procuring IoT in any shape or form. Because it's so critical to keep keep that into consideration. You've got data, ethics, and security sitting there. You've got the technology being developed, and then we've all meeting the net zero decarbonisation agenda equally. So it's three segments that need to be dealt with simultaneously together.
Exactly, and it's managing that risk to really release that opportunity. So if we get into the questions, I know we've sort of answered one or two of them in the chat already, and if you put them in the ask a question, but we'll pick Luke's up again, and I'll flip it straight back to you, Tina, because Luke's asking, is there any requirement for differing manufacturers of technology to use common software? So, MVHR, one brand, heat pump another, central control unit to talk and control all the tech, especially in residential. So from an ACO perspective, where are you seeing that kind of joined up thinking and talking and that shared platforms, and what potentially might ACO be doing to try and advance that kind of sync? Tina, if you'd like to pick Luke's up first, please.
I think it's about having the open APIs. I think we want everyone to take technology and data and understand their homes to help them in their future and their health and well-being. But having open APIs is crucial. And we've got, for example, our gateway, and we're developing it we see it as being a single platform where you should only have one hub, one gateway within the home, and having the open APIs to collaborate is a key way to moving forward. So it's about having those discussions collectively. So who says that one gateway can't be the be-all end-all for your home to control your lighting, to talking to your Alexa, to monitoring your damp, humidity, your mold and fire and CO, all the way to letting you know whether there's potential of fuel poverty requirements to the landlord. It's about open API and collaborative working on many levels.
Excellent. And I know
I've got Paul saying
Claire wants to come in there as well. Yeah, Claire wants to come in there, but could I also throw, as I bring it to you, Claire, there is a second question was coming in from Luke, and he was also asking to Joe and Claire, so maybe Claire will take that as well, and we'll bundle them together. So he's currently a structural engineer working for a steel fabricator, like to transition into this sector, buildings and energy sustainability, passionate about all the above, the research or industry. Would you have any advice? So for Claire and Joe, we have talked a lot about skills and opportunities. So as well as maybe picking up on Tina's first point, for Claire, and then I come to Joe as well, if you could directly sort of repeat some of what you've already typed in the side there about literally how we are going to onboard people who want to get involved in the solutions. Claire first.
Yeah, so just to pick up on Tina's point about open APIs, so that's very much what we see across the industry. But of course, when we're putting something together where there's often multiple different companies involved, what we're really interested in whenever we're doing any RFPs is what are the standards that those APIs reference back to. So typically there's all the ISO standards, and depending on what we're looking at, there's usually a relevant standard. So it's making sure that when we're looking to commission anything that it it meets those minimum standards. So I think that's a very important link with that. In terms of career changers, I spent 18 years in financial services. I then decided to do a master's in cities, and it's very much about identifying what are your transferable skills, right? It sounds like you have exactly the right foundation in place to make a transition across to this. So understanding buildings and how they operate, the integration then of kind of the mechanical engineering components, and then we have people on our team that come from all different backgrounds. So some have that structural and engineering background, some have kind of the architecture, urban planning background. What they all have in common is they've just got stuck in and started to learn about IoT and some of these new technologies. Because I think the most interesting point, and something I've seen repeatedly in my career, is the person who puts their hand up and goes, okay, I'll have a look at that VR thing you want someone to look at, and 2 years later, they've become an expert and their career has gone off in a completely different direction. And so I think, just get stuck in whatever you're interested in, do some of it and, network. I think we're here today, but hopefully real life networking will come back at some point. But Joe,
good stuff. So Joe, also if you'd like to pick up the how people can get involved professionally, career-wise.
Obviously most universities that have got sustainability or environmental or built environment are running sort of master's courses that can that are linked to smart energy buildings in some respects, but I think it is such an incredibly broad area. And as long as I think from experience and working on retrofit projects and new builds and everything, I think you have to, the passion and the commitment to make a difference really will make a difference. You can make a massive difference by having that passion and commitment. And so it's just getting on board and choosing what element you've got a skill set in or what you're really passionate about changing, because like I said, it goes right through from planning a project, designing a project, procuring the right technologies, installing those technologies, and then maintaining and operating them. The housing officers, they need to understand what smart technologies are going into the houses. They need to know what data they're collecting, because they need to be able to support the occupants. So it goes right through the entire housing sector, right through the entire construction sector. And you're better off choosing the elements that you're most passionate about.
Exactly.
But I think there are an awful lot of master's courses and opportunities with post PhDs as well. So don't be afraid to get in touch with academic institutions.
Exactly. Could I ask one teeny follow-up while I've got you there, Joe? Obviously, you're from School of Architecture. So what is the role for designers? And obviously, we understand engineers are involved. But what about the design community and the importance of them being involved so to avoid just bolt-on bling, which we all know is less efficient and less successful and potentially more costly? So how involved is the design community in this tech debate?
How involved are they at the moment? Not that much. Right. How involved do they need to be? Massively.
Exactly.
Particularly with retrofits, I'm involved in the redesign of our undergraduate course at the moment to bring in sustainability, which is being driven by the RIBA, and it's critical, because you can't install, if you install an air source heat pump, you have to have a high performing fabric in a retrofit. To install the high performing fabric, you need to install external wall insulation or internal wall insulation. That isn't just a matter of slapping something on the outside of a building, especially when you're dealing with smaller housing that you've got in social housing stock. You narrow pathways where people can't get a buggy down, a wheelchair. All of those design elements need to be considered in the process. So we have to have architects involved in the design of a whole house retrofit. If they're not involved, either the wrong solutions will be selected, or the retrofits will not achieve anywhere near the carbon savings that we need to achieve to get anywhere near zero carbon. So a good quality retrofit has to include an entire range of skill sets to make sure that it gets delivered to the quality and standard that they should, because otherwise we're messing with people's lives. At the end of the day, it is people's health, people's lives, everything.
Good, nice points made, and good to hear things are changing, albeit somewhat slower than they should be. And a couple more comments in the chat already, Paul, folks. So a few nice things, including we need to stop silo thinking. All areas are linked. And also give a shout out also to Abdul, who's joining us from Hyderabad in India. Again, it's great you can make it in terms of time zones. So I've got a question that came in via LinkedIn, which I'll throw to you, Tina, actually. It's a question about how fast is the payback on some of these smart technologies. And I'd like you to, there's a second question I'd like to add on to that is how fast is the payback? Secondly, we understand fuel bills are going up, money's tight, but is that the question we should really be asking? So how fast do you get your money back, and should that be the only question we're asking too?
Well, the question to be asked is how much is it helping improve your health and well-being? I think we're thinking about it totally wrong. It's not about money, is it? It's not about money and payback. It's how is it improving someone's health and well-being, and what difference is it making to someone's life? Payback is quite simple. It's data. You get a vast amount of data points out of it. It's what you make the most of the data. For example, our dashboard will give you notification of people with high temperature or low temperature within the property. Yep. That'll also tell you whether the insulation measures that you've installed in the simple insulation measures have been effective or not. It'll also tell you whether your host, if you design a property and your orientation isn't correct and your triple glazing is creating too much heat in the property, it can support whatever you need it to support. So payback isn't about payback. It pays back as quickly as you think it does. But psychologically, it's about how we're going to help improve the health and well-being of people. I think people need to stop thinking about, it's not like solar PV and feed-in tariffs and, when am I going to get my payback on that period? It's all about what we're implementing now is going to help long-term health and well-being, short, medium, and long-term. Stop thinking about necessarily money and return of investment. Yes, you need that return on investment, but there are social values that are going to come out as returns and not necessarily total monetary value on this.
Excellent. Very good response. And a nice point also allied to this from Joe in the chat. I think it's about value, not cost. And I've got another question, actually. I'll throw this one to you first, Claire, if I may. So we know that new build is not even 1%. So we're talking about the other 99% of housing. So it's all about retrofit. But if I could ask you, because someone who has a slightly wider perspective, how realistic is to be talking about retrofitting whole estates, communities, cities even? How easily can we be talking about retrofit on a bigger scale rather than just individual units of accommodation?
I think this one again comes back to the skills question. I mean, if you look at, I think a year ago or so, there was the Green Homes Grant that was out across the country. So you could add solar panels, insulation. There were a number of measures you could do. But when you went to builders, and in fact, this was just pre-COVID, they were swamped trying to understand it. And they had enough paying clients that they kind of went, maybe come back. I'll come back to you in a couple of months. So, I think there's, again, the skills gap and certainly in some of the green aspects of, we had an issue recently where the boiler went and when it's an emergency and you are standing in front of someone who is an expert, you're saying, how quickly can I please have heating again? That's not the moment you want to talk about a ground source heat pump or these options. And when we did briefly ask about them and, the local folks were just kind of stunned. So I think there is still a major gap in the market where, if we're to get this done at scale, the skills is a big part of it. I think, one of the things we know during COVID was there was a building boom, right? Everyone in their little house went, I just need a little more space. And so that's, again, putting pressure on this same system. So I do think in this case, skills and capacity is a huge part of that answer.
Excellent. And of course, we also have a little supply chain glitch, to say the least. I think, did I see your hand go up temporarily there, Joe? Did it go up and go down again, or did you want to add?
Yeah, it was just to add to what Claire really said about the skills, the supply chain. But I think the main thing is that our housing stock in the UK is poor quality and it is old and it is going to need to be refurbished quite significantly over the next 20 to 30 years plus. And retrofit should be part of that refurbishment. It shouldn't be seen, retrofit refurbishment should be part of the package. We've recently retrofitted some bungalows with Swansea Council, 6 bungalows. We've managed to improve the EPC rating from a G to an A, with the SAP ratings up to nearly 100 now. Those bungalows were not fit for human habitation. They were damp, they were cold, they probably would have been knocked down within the next 5 years. So we've given them a new lease of life completely. They'll survive. So retrofitting shouldn't be seen as a mechanism for just saving carbon, but more of providing a good quality housing stock for the future. And if the smart element of that can be, if smart can be part of that retrofit, then even much better. That just enhances that even further.
Exactly. Well, I saw Tina's hand go up, and actually we're just approaching time, so I'd like to give the final word to you there, Tina, then on that whole retrofit, the idea that smart is just something for shiny and new properties with shiny and new kit. Obviously, retrofit is where the market is really going to grow. So I wonder if you could just close with a couple of comments on how retrofittable all of this is, please, Tina. You're on mute, sorry. Final comments on mute, classic.
Perfect. But retrofitting isn't a bad thing, because that creates physical regeneration, which equates to social regeneration equally. It can boost community morale and create a thriving community, first of all. Smart technology plays a part in it, because there's no point putting insulation measures in. One, if you can't monitor the impact of them and prove to people that it's actually worked. I think those are the two aspects of it. And that's it from me.
Excellent. No, perfect. And a very good note to finish on. So we are right on time. Really good debate, loads of chat, and I'm sure there are loads more questions. All of this, including the chat and all those excellent resources and links that were shared, will be available in the on-demand version as well. So nothing's lost. You can access it afterwards and cycle back and look, especially if you missed the first 2 minutes. So in closing then, big thank you to our panelists, Claire, Joan, of course, Tina, and our sponsors at ACO. To yourselves, our virtual audience out there on Crowdcast, for your comments, your questions, your chat, your thumbs ups, your joinings, all of the above. Reminder to check out elementalexpo.com. If you missed it at the top of the show, it's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. Full diary of events on the website, including upcoming webinars, back catalogue. As I say, this happily Crowdcast, it's available almost within a minute after we've finished. So you can share it, rewatch it, look back, straight away available. You don't have to wait 24, 48 hours. So available to watch on demand straight away. So thank you again to the panel. That's it for today. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SustMeme. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you, everybody.